What's up guys, this is John with Skate Better, and today we're doing the Primitive 8.38 deck review. So the video you just saw was the last day that I skated this deck. And the reason that I put those clips in is because I wanted you guys to see how much pop this deck still had left in it after about a month and a half of skating, which I thought was pretty crazy. I'll get into that a little bit later in the review, but let's start with some general things about this deck. So the first thing I want to talk about is the shape of this deck. This deck measures 8.38 by 31.92 and has a wheelbase of 14.25. So pretty average wheelbase, a little bit shorter than a 32, which is like average deck length. And then 8.38, I'm finding that I still really love that width. I'm skating an 8.5 hockey right now. This guy, I'll do a review on that later. And I think I'm going to make 8.38 my permanent deck size, but I always say that and then I change it, so whatever. So overall, the shape of this deck, I really enjoyed. It has I'd say on a scale of 1 to 10, 10 being super high concave, and then 1 being like a super flat deck, I'd give it like a 7.5. Maybe an 8, but I'd still say a solid 7.5. So it's like a medium to medium heavy concave. So just the way that the deck is this way. The pitch in the deck, which is this going on right here, the angle of the nose and the tail, I'd say was mellow, and I kind of liked that. I take that back. So the pitch of this deck was a little bit steeper than some decks that I've ridden in the past. I'd still say that 0 was the steepest pitch, but this one came in at number 2. And once again, like I would say in this order, it would kind of go like mellow to greatest would be like Girl, Anti-Hero, Baker, and then would maybe get like to something like this, like a Primitive, which would be slightly on the steeper side with the pitch and the concave. So not the highest pitch or concave that I've skated, but definitely not the least. And I have to say I loved it. It was like a perfect balance. I think I do like a little bit more concave than mellow. I'm actually thinking about going back to a mellow deck after this one just to see how that feels. Like a super mellow deck, like a Girl or a Chocolate or something would be really cool. But anyways, I really did like having more concave and a little bit more pitch. I just really enjoy it. I think you get a lot of yield out of the pop, and I can put a good amount of pressure into my pop, so I think that works out for me. So the next thing I want to talk about is wheelbase. The wheelbase is 14.25, which is pretty average for like an 8 to 8.25 deck. So this being an 8.38, being a shorter deck at 31.92, I do think that it needed that wheelbase to bring it in a little bit more. Especially for me, since I rode Thunders, which are a wider wheelbase, it balanced out really nicely. I think an even slightly smaller wheelbase, I would have liked maybe even more. But the thing with the longer wheelbase, with the Thunders pushing it out and it being a shorter deck, is the tail. So once again, this is the nose, this is the tail. The tail of this deck is not a very long tail. It actually has kind of a shorter tail based on the other decks I've ridden in the past. So when you push the truck back further, you all of a sudden start getting a higher yield, which is great and in one sense, but also it takes the tail longer to hit the ground so it can throw off your snap timing. And for me, it actually worked out nice because the tail is a little bit of a mellower pitch than the nose, or just it's not super high, the pitch. It actually kind of balanced out the snap with it being a longer wheelbase. So I actually really enjoyed the way that felt. I think if I made the tail a little bit longer, put a little bit more flat here, it would almost be like the perfect size or the perfect shape for me. And once again, just saying it again, this is one of my favorite shapes that I've ever ridden in a deck. I think if you haven't tried Primitive, you gotta give it a shot. I can't remember the distribution, if it's like deluxe or wherever these come from, but the wood feels really solid. Which kind of brings me to my next point. So the wood feels really good, and the pop in this deck was insane. Like when I first got it, it felt really good. Given that I was coming off of recycled wood from Anti-Hero 8.5 I was skating, that also being a heavier deck, and recycled wood I just learned is not the same like pop as regular, so I probably will never buy a price point deck again. However, that being said, this deck was so crispy, it felt amazing. The first day I skated it, I remember thinking like it already feels natural, it already feels normal. This shape just worked for me so well. The other thing I want to mention about this shape is the nose and the tail. So it has kind of like a roundier tail and a pretty round popsicle nose. So to me, that is like perfect. It's the perfect combination of not a super square nose or tail, but also not a super tapered one. Like it rounds off right in the perfect spot for me, which is right here. it tapers a little, and then it kind of gets like more popsicle-y right around that spot. So to me, that was perfect. It gave me just the right amount of space for my front foot when I was doing things like nollie or fakie, and then it also allowed me to have a little bit more space on the tail, even though it's not a particularly long tail. So I love that about the shape. I guess getting back to the pop, so super crispy pop. One of the negatives was, I remember the second day I was skating it, I was practicing something off the tail, and I chipped it super bad. Like the tail chipped, like a really thick chunk came out, like right here. And what's cool is as I continued to skate the deck, pop, 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 eventually that wore down, and now it's actually smooth again, which is really funny. But having a huge chunk rip out of my tail the second day really bummed me out, and I was just snapping it on the ground. It didn't like ding into anything. So I kind of questioned whether this deck was gonna last whether this deck was gonna last a long time. But alas, like I said in the beginning of this video, you guys can see from those first clips that it still has a lot of pop in it. I could definitely keep skating this deck if I wanted to. It has a little bit of razor tail. The nose still has a good amount of pop. But honestly, I think I'm done. I really wanted to give some other decks a shot, and it's been about 2 months, so I'm gonna call it quits for now. The next thing I'll say about this deck was the graphics. I really loved the paint and the way that the inlay held up. It held up a lot better than some other decks that I've had. And I think that something I've noticed is every deck uses super different like lacquers or paints, and they all kind of finish differently and they all kind of look a little different. So this one I enjoyed. I think it was cool because I forget what this is, the top stain, I think is what it's called. The stain at the top of this deck was like the same color as a lot of the graphic on the bottom, and that's really nice. And sometimes it's not, it'll be like super random. So I just love the way this deck looked. Like flipping this gold foil felt so good. And then I would say in the front, there's actually not, or it didn't feel like there was a lot of flat between this hole and where the deck kind of comes up. And that made it really easy to kickflip. So I'm not like a perfectionist with kickflips, like I got them, but it's not like super high crispy every time, you know what I mean? So to have that little advantage of having my foot a little bit, setting it up a little bit closer and not having to flick out as far, made a huge difference in my flip trick, and I actually really enjoyed that. One of the other cons I'll say about this deck, and I can't blame the deck itself, was just I put on Mob M80 grip tape, and it wasn't super grippy. I'll do a review on that later. But that kind of, I think if I would have had Shake Jump or gone with my regular grip, this probably would have been my favorite deck I've skated. And it might still be my favorite deck I've ever skated. I think one of the last things I want to say is if you haven't tried Primitive, I would definitely recommend giving it a shot. Especially if you like decks that have a little bit more concave in them, I think you're gonna love the deck. It has a lot of pop. I'll also say it's one of the lightest decks for an 838 that I've ever skated, as opposed to the real 8.38 and the Toy Machine before. This has really felt light, and I think that's because it's a little bit shorter of a deck, so that maybe has something to do with it, I don't know, but it just felt really light, really poppy, really crispy, and I loved it. I think the last con I'll say, it's not even really a con, it's just a personal preference, is if the wheelbase had been brought in a little bit more, and I had a little bit more room here, and especially in the tail, I think manuals would have felt a lot nicer. Those didn't feel like super amazing coming right off this deck, because once again, like less lever is harder than imagine balancing on like something like this, right? It'd be a lot easier. So the further out the wheelbase is, it just made it a little bit tougher on that. But because it's such a compact, like kind of like nugget shape, it's like it's thick this way, but it's also not super long, and the wheelbase is tight, it still worked really well. I think as like a technical deck, a flat ground deck, this would be an amazing deck. I didn't jump down too many things with it. My ankle was still healing after it, but I definitely think it could take some impact. And I did hurt my ankle jumping down something pretty decently sized with this deck. So I'll leave it at that, I think, as far as the deck's concerned. So that's pretty much it. That's all I got for today. I hope you guys enjoyed the review. I also wanted to say I really appreciate you guys. Everyone that's subscribed to the channel, that's liked, commented, or anything like that, just know I really appreciate it. I love all the support. You guys are the best. That's why I do this. I really do try to get to every comment that's posted. So just please know I appreciate all of that. In closing, I did put some clips in of me skating this deck at the end. It's basically all the same clips that I had from the Nike SB Blazer video. All those clips were skated on this deck. So I threw those in at the end of this video too, so you could have some more clips. See what this deck looks like in case you didn't catch that video. Thanks again. I'll catch you guys next time.